Welcome back, everybody, to another video for National Invasive Species Awareness Week. Today, we're going to be talking about this ugly sucker right here, the bighead carp, or in Latin, Hypophthalmicus nobilis. So, get a good look at it here. We're going to get familiar with it throughout this presentation. So, some of the stats and identifying features of this fish. Typically, it's 16 to 22 inches long, but it can top out at 60 inches long and 100 pounds, which makes it potentially a very, very large fish. It is dark gray at kind of the top or the back of it, and that dark gray will kind of dissipate into a lighter gray and silver along the sides until you get to the underbelly of the fish, and that is kind of an off-white. Sometimes there's little bits of red mixed in, kind of a rusty color mixed in with that gray, but they are a pretty bright and shiny silver in appearance until they get to be about 2 months of age. And then those darker colors and some of the dark splotches start to get mixed in. They don't have the barbels, the whiskers on the underside of the mouth. And obviously these low set eyes that are on the bottom half of its body are going to be probably the biggest telltale sign of this fish. It's pretty distinct looking. It looks very much like the silver carp. We'll touch on that in just a second here. But again, they're very similar looking. The bighead carp is a little bit larger though, but both pose similar issues. And are approached similarly in terms of response. So it's not super crucial to be able to tell one from the other, as long as you recognize that it's an invasive and know to report it. That should do well enough for most people. The North American carp, which is the one on the bottom left here, it does have those barbels, those little whiskers. I don't know how well you can see them here, but just a little one, kind of like how a catfish might have those whiskers on it too, but they just have one on each side of the corner of their mouth. When the bighead carp reproduce, the females can produce 280,000 to 1 million eggs. Usually we would try and include a picture of the eggs, but it proved a little bit hard to find, and it just kind of comes out of the fish almost as a fluid. There's so many of them, and they're so small. So we don't have a picture of those, but they just kind of mix in, and they will travel along with the current, as they tend to spawn in areas where there is a bit more of a current going on, and they'll get carried along the river or what have you until they finally get fertilized and then hatch. So they travel from where they actually get put out by the female carp. So if you take a look at the map to the bottom right, you can see those kind of brownish, reddish, maroon areas are all places where it has been found. You should probably be able to notice, obviously, it's traveling along the river, but then expanding out at areas from there, meaning that you typically, once it moves up the river, it will expand outward to different bodies of water from there for a number of different reasons, whether they're interconnected or they're being moved through human means. They tend to expand once they show up to an area. So it's so crucial that they stay out of the Great Lakes. There are technically grass carp or green carp in the Great Lakes, have been since the 1980s, and they seem to be staying pretty low and pretty stable in terms of number. But the bighead carp and also the silver carp behave a bit differently from the grass carp, and it'll be a much bigger issue if those make their way into the Great Lakes. But thankfully, they're not in there yet, or at least not in any massive, alarming number that we've seen. To my knowledge, again, they have not established themselves in any of the Great Lakes yet. They're native to Asia. A lot of times you will hear the catch-all term of Asian carp to describe some of these. The fish up to the right-hand side, bighead carp, grass carp, silver carp, and black carp are all from Asia. They're all invasives. They share some similarities in kind of the size and layout that they have. Obviously, the most two similar being the bighead and the silver carp, but Asian carp is a catch-all term for those, and they're all invasive and distinct from the native North American carp that we saw on the slide before this one. So this map on the bottom left is just kind of a more local showing um, of where they are in terms of the state of Michigan. And you can see there in Illinois, they're doing their best to hold them right there at the edge getting into Lake Michigan. So some of the issues, we've touched on them a little bit, but they are essentially filter feeders originally brought in to help control algae in aquaculture ponds, and they escaped from there and have been traveling along the rivers and expanding outward from there. And because they're starting right at the most basic and low level of the food web, um, they have a huge impact on all of the smaller animals that eat that algae, and then those die off. The larger predatory animals that eat the smaller animals that eat the algae then die off. And you can see how that ripple effect would take place pretty quickly. So when you have these hundreds of thousands of these carps all coming in, clearing out this algae, um, that impact is amplified. They don't have really any native predators in the area because they're not from here initially. And so they're kind of moving in as a stranger, and there's not a ton of stuff that wants to take it out or eat it because it doesn't, nothing recognizes it as food. Um, they reproduce in great numbers, as was touched on a little bit earlier, and there's just kind of a general safety concern with them in some of the areas where their populations get really high. As you can see this picture from the bottom, they do come up out of the water, and as I said earlier, they can get up to 100 pounds. So if you're cruising along in a boat at a good clip and one of these comes out of the water, there have been notes of people getting concussions and other pretty serious injuries if you get hit with one of these fish, which sounds a little bit ridiculous, a fish coming out of the water and hitting you in the head, knocking you off a boat or something. But when they get in large numbers like this, it is entirely plausible. Now, this here down at the bottom, I don't know if these are specifically bighead carp. It looks like they might be silver carp based on the size, as best I can tell. But if the bighead carp, if this isn't bighead carp here and they reach these same numbers, it's an even bigger problem because it's an even bigger fish. So they are still in the process of researching what the best method of controlling and dropping these populations are going to be moving forward. So we'll be sure to keep people up to date on that as it's revealed. Don't practice catch and release with the invasive carp. Michigan at this time, I could not find anything that specifically says to kill and dispose of these fish, but I know other areas where they have become a problem. They have encouraged that sort of thing. And the state of Michigan obviously discourages catch and release of these fish. So I would take that to mean if you do happen to catch one of these fish to not only dispose of the fish, but dispose of it properly. And that means, don't cut it up and throw it back over to the side, because if there's eggs or something in there, it can still spread. So that goes back to the CD3 that we talk a lot about: clean, drain, dry, dispose. Make sure that you're disposing of any bait or anything that would come in contact with these fish properly and not dumping it back into that same body of water, or even worse, a different body of water. In Illinois, they have put in place electric barriers to keep these fish from going into Lake Michigan. That's going to be the main point of access from where they're at now to where we don't want them to be. So that's something that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has put together. I don't know a ton on the specifics of how that works or how they're implementing that with bighead carp specifically and not just fish in general. But I do know that that is something that they are doing. And if anybody is curious about that and would like more information, just let me know. I'm happy to dig a little bit deeper into that and see how that works, because I'm a bit curious myself. So here are the sources that we use today. If anybody wants any of this information for themselves, please do let me know. I know some of these are pretty long URLs to try and jot down or copy. So if you just want a clickable version or anything like that, feel free to let me know. Thanks so much again for checking in and hearing a little bit about the very ugly bighead carp here today. We will keep putting out 2 more days. 2 more days we have for these videos this week for the National Invasive Species Awareness Week. So again, thanks for joining us and checking this out today. Have a good one.